IB Nation Sports Talk up and rolling. It's Tuesday. He's Jesse Stiers. I'm Sean Stiers. How you doing? Hope you're having a good one. I was under the weather yesterday. Came back from North Carolina with a little bug in me. Still not feeling 100% today, but doing better anyway. And before we even got in today, Tommy Guns came in hot. Why are Vince and Jesse slacking yesterday instead of picking up the slack for a down and out team member? He says he's just being sarcastic. But I feel like, Jesse, this is just a chance to tee off and throw Vince under the bus if you want to.
Yeah. Vince apparently, saw some text messages late. Hard to believe considering
That's the story. That's the story. I sent the text, early enough so that everyone, mainly for you, since it wasn't your scheduled day to kind of say, hey, whatever. And then, Vince conveniently waits until what time was it? 4:30. Oh, I just saw this that you sent 6-7 hours ago.
He must have had a really busy day.
Yes. I think so too. We will get to Notre Dame women's basketball. We would have talked about it obviously on yesterday's show, but since again, I was sick yesterday, so we didn't have a show yesterday. We will get to it in rapid fire. There've been plenty of comments already coming in today about that. Andre wants to say, I hope you're not ranking these coaches. We're talking about Notre Dame assistant coaches today. No, we're not ranking them. I thought we would come at it from a little bit different perspective, though, as we kind of, assess, not rank, but assess, sort of where each of these assistants are, the 8 assistant coaches who are returning under Marcus Freeman from last season to next. I didn't include J1 Sider or Chris Ash in this little exercise here, but we're going to do word association. We're going to toss them out. Jesse will, go chain of thought, what he thinks, and I'll kind of give my 2 cents as well on all these assistant coaches. I thought it would be a little different, little word association today. What do you think?
It's kind of like the rapid fire before the rapid fire, because that's what a word association
kind of
is. And so we're just going to kind of keep it, first thing that comes to mind, maybe talk on it a little bit, and then see what you have to say that comes to mind, and then we'll just move on down the list. Luckily for us, like you said, there's 8 returning coaches, and
we got plenty.
It's a good assessment because a lot of them have been here for now, majority 2, 3, 4 seasons. So there's only a couple outliers, I think, that have only been here a season, and Denbrock and Mike Brown. But I think it's a good way it's a fun way to spice up this Tuesday show.
Yeah, that's right. And we've got 3 weeks to go until the start of spring practice. So, we're kind of like exactly 3 weeks away from that. And by the way, tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to get to talk with J1 Sider for the first time. They're doing a little press conference tomorrow afternoon. So I'll be over there for that. I'll come back. We'll have some of his comments, I'm sure, in rapid fire, because tomorrow is mailbag day. But so we'll get the chance to do that tomorrow as well. Get a chance to hear J1 Sider for the first time, ask him questions, get his thoughts and everything else. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in rapid fire as well. And again, we'll get to the women's basketball and the NC State game in rapid fire as well. I'm just going to start firing some coaches at you, and let's see where we go. We're going to start with the offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, word association. Go.
Difference maker. And the reason why I say difference maker is I feel like Notre Dame's defense has been at that national championship level, going on maybe 2-3 seasons now. And really the thing that's been lacking to put Notre Dame over the top in probably the last 10 to 15 years compared to a national level is their offense. And I think everyone knew Parker wasn't going to cut it if they wanted to have, a legit national presence when it turned in terms of offense. And then, in steps Mike Denbrock, a guy who was an SEC coordinator took Jaden Daniels from the transfer portal and spun him around into, a Heisman winning quarterback and probably the best rookie quarterback in the NFL this past season. So you can see that the success also translate. It's not just, a one-off wonder essentially. And so I think Mike Denbrock has to be the difference maker of what's going to separate and I think ultimately win a national championship for Notre Dame is can they bridge that gap between what Ohio State put on display in the national championship and where they're kind of currently at right now? And I think he himself, in terms of scheme, recruiting, getting the personnel that he needs, is ultimately the difference maker for this team going forward.
You said difference maker a couple of times, and that's kind of something that, has stuck in my head as well. Guru, difference maker. He's got all the tools in the tool shed and to elevate, to continue to elevate this offense. I think he did a good job last year. He's going to have even, I think it can be even different this year because of the fact that, he came in around this time last year, I guess a little bit earlier, but he came in the offseason, and then he inherits Riley Leonard from the transfer portal. He doesn't get to, actually see Riley Leonard for, with the exception of just a few snaps in the spring before Leonard was hurt again, and had to have the second foot surgery. And, so I think we're really going to get a chance to see the impression that he has made and that he'll continue to make on this offense because of the fact that he's got complete familiarity with all the personnel now. And that includes incoming recruits. He played at least a part in helping recruit some of the incoming guys and, and has an existing relationship with everybody basically. So I think that he can now, as the first returning, second year offensive coordinator that Marcus Freeman has had in his time here, I feel like he can really put his stamp on this Notre Dame offense this season and really show himself to be, not that he wasn't a difference maker last year with what he did, but I just think that he can really truly be a difference maker this year and going forward now with all that familiarity that he has with all the guys that he's going to be coaching.
Yeah, I think familiarity will help. I think getting, quarterback developed and in the system for now, what would be their second season under the Mike Denbrock offense. But, I think that offense, and one of the best things about Mike Denbrock is his offense isn't really set in stone. It's going to be predicated around what that quarterback does well. And that's, exhibit A for that is what Riley Leonard, how the game was kind of called and managed for Riley Leonard this past season, because, I guarantee that his traditional offense and what you kind of saw more of at LSU is someone who could, be more effective in the passing game and probably be more consistent in the passing game and a bit more, of a downfield threat as well. But I would rather have an offensive coordinator that's, flexible, and is smart enough to kind of tailor an offense around what he's got rather than kind of try to, force something down the throat and it just be an ongoing conflict or a battle, because it would basically be NIU all over again throughout the rest of the season, right? And so I think that's what you're going to see, if it's Angeli, Menchie, Carr, is a different, a lot of the same stuff is going to be, principles are going to be the same, but different kind of, overall play design depending on who's going to be quarterback. And all of that will entail more passing, I think.
You feel better, worse, unchanged about Denbrock now compared to a little more than a year ago when they hired him?
I feel better because not that the Riley Leonard situation was bad, but I think that there was just kind of some unforeseen things of, the lingering issues with his ankle, not being able to probably get the full install in spring, and he was behind in fall as well. So the ability to kind of work around those things and be adaptable and still have, still take an offense that can get you to the national championship and really was, a few plays away here and there. Ultimately, I feel better about it because I think, they're going to get better at the quarterback position in terms of a
Mhm.
true, quarterback thrower of the ball. I think the offensive line is going to be pretty much the same, probably better because it's more experienced. You still have great running backs in the room. You're going to have wide receivers who are more comfortable. So you should probably see better years at a Great House, Faison, and then now you have the transfer coming in, Malachi. He's another guy who should, add experience and be kind of like that Bo Collins type player, maybe a bit more, a bit better in terms of production. So, offensively, they theoretically should be upgrading almost everywhere. So yeah, I do feel better about Mike Denbrock as we go forward.
I feel better as well because of the theme that you're talking about, his ability to adjust and adapt to the personnel that he has, and the whole situation with Riley Leonard. Not that it was a bad situation by any means, but just getting on the same page, and the fact that no matter how successful the offense was, you still heard criticism from the outside about can Riley Leonard do this, can he do that, and whatever else. They got to the national championship game, and he made it work, and they were the number 10 scoring offense in the nation, in spite of the fact that it was never really a perfect situation. So I feel a lot better, again, because one, the familiarity that he has, two, all that they had to adapt to over the course of the season between Leonard and what he could or couldn't do, getting on the same page there. And then, like you said, with the offensive line as well. So I think there's a lot of things to feel really good about. Joe throwing a little shade. Do you think Denbrock knew he wouldn't win a championship at LSU, and that's why he came to Notre Dame? I like I see what you did there, Joe. I see what you did. All right, how about wide receivers coach Mike Brown?
Yeah, I think the word that comes to mind most is expectations. It's year 2 for Mike Brown. We know that the wide receiver room was, left somewhat a mess as he kind of came in or arrived. I thought the wide receivers were better last season. I don't think that they were, a common gripe that I have is that Notre Dame hasn't had a true stud wide receiver in a long time. That was still true last season, in my opinion. So I think that there is an expectation for Mike Brown to find that wide receiver one, a true, 1,000-yard receiver, because in Mike Denbrock's last season at LSU, they had 2 1,000-yard receivers. And so if we're talking about an offense that's going to throw the ball more, and be more kind of to Denbrock's roots in terms of the passing game and less running out of the quarterback, you got to have at least 1,000-yard receiver. And I think you need to have another one that's 500 and above at minimum as well. So I think that's on Mike Brown to work with Mike Denbrock and really get this wide receiver room, developed, kind of whipped into shape, and continuously recruit at a relentless level to try to, refill the cabinet essentially at the end of the day as well. So, Notre Dame, I think, needs to find that run that they went on of, Jeff Samardzija, Golden Tate, Michael Floyd, Chase Claypool, Miles Boykin, almost. That's the kind of, they need to rebuild that to a degree. And I know it maybe tapers out at the end when you start talking about like Boykin and Chase Claypool, but definitely, Golden Tate, Michael Floyd, someone like that.
But I mean, it's still kind of a chicken or egg situation. That seems like what they've been chasing for several years. Because like you go back to, even when Jack Cohn was here, Kevin Austin was, he had a nice season, 48 catches for over 800 yards. That's really the biggest season that we've seen from a Notre Dame receiver in a while. And, I mean, that's going back even, basically you have to go back to Will Fuller prior to, I guess Claypool, like you said, Claypool, Boykin.
That's where you draw the line.
Yeah. I mean, it's, but again, it's like chicken or egg in terms of what you have at quarter. Is it the quarterbacks? Is it the quarterback and their ability or inability to get them the ball, or is it the receivers? Now, obviously, you can't put anything in terms of what was in the receivers room on Mike Brown last year. So that's why for me,
right,
when I think of him, it's TBD. But you've got to see the to be determined here. You've got to start to see some fruits of that pretty quickly, especially considering the fact you are going to have different quarterbacks who we all have full confidence can throw the ball differently than what we've seen thrown the last couple of years. So like it's like with each rep really that we see from these receivers, I don't know that we're going to necessarily be, maybe some people will, holding each rep under the microscope, but I mean, we expect to see a lot from them. And when you're bringing in, Malachi, from Virginia, like you expect to see something now, right? Like we expect with a guy with that kind of experience. They brought in a couple guys with experience last year, and we saw varying results from that. Now there is a step up when you're talking about Florida International for Chris Mitchell to Notre Dame and the ACC and everything else. We saw flashes from him, but ultimately, like what we saw from Chris Mitchell really wasn't that much, probably less than what I thought we would see from him based on what we got to see, during the practices when we saw him out there. He was a big question mark. There were flashes of some good things. There were still some flashes, that we saw in different spots all the way around. But I think, this is not a make or break year for Mike Brown, but it's definitely kind of a prove it year, I think, because the free pass is gone now, and we've got to start to see some development from that room. But it does, again, correlate to what's going on with the quarterbacks as well.
I agree.
Okay. Gino Guidugli, the quarterback's coach. Word association.
This is gonna, I think, prove I did some homework.
Ooh,
for Gino Guidugli, I went with the word technician, and the reason I went with the word technician is because these quarterbacks, this is a big year in terms of quarterback development for Notre Dame, and it's a big year for starting quarterback at Notre Dame. And so the reason I went with the word technician is because it's on Gino Guidugli to equip these quarterbacks with the necessary tools to execute Mike Denbrock's offense, right? Like he's coming in, he needs to have first a good relationship with Mike Denbrock and an understanding of his offense and how it operates, and then two, what can he do to, basically what drills can he run, and the study of film can these guys do to get the best performance out of the quarterback so they can operate the offense at the highest level. And so when you think of technician, you think of a guy who's constantly breaking down film, finding the little things, technique wise to help these guys out. And then on the other side of it is when you're actually at practice, you're putting together a good plan of drills. And so your quarterback can, again, be the most successful and run the offense at an efficient level. So that's to me ultimate. Like he's just got to be the ultimate quarterback technician at the end of the day for me. If Notre Dame truly wants to develop an in-house quarterback and have them lead a premier offense in college football.
Yeah, to me, Gino Guidugli is somewhat under the radar because you've got a quarterback's coach who's not the offensive coordinator. And a lot of times those things will go hand in hand. If the offensive coordinator is going to coach a position, a lot of time, I'm not saying all the time, but a lot of times it's going to be the quarterbacks. And, obviously the offensive coordinator is the head coach of the offense. So you do tend to put, more in terms of success or failure on him. And that kind of leaves that gray area for Gino Guidugli to operate in. And we really, because again, like go back to Riley Leonard. What did we talk about? Leonard and Denbrock not being on the same page. It wasn't necessarily Leonard and Guidugli. And, we really get to basically talk to Gino like twice a year. We get to talk to him in the spring, and we get to talk to him during fall training camp, and we kind of get his thoughts on the quarterbacks and things like that. And then otherwise, it's all Mike Denbrock throughout the season, which it should be because, again, he's the coordinator. But what's the evidence that we have of Guidugli so far? Like taking Riley Leonard out of the picture, we have the fact that we've seen Steve Angeli in a starting situation in the Sun Bowl, and he came in and was ready to go. He stepped into the Sun Bowl, started, and let him to a Sun Bowl victory. We saw him for a handful of snaps in the season, but then we saw him in the biggest situation of his career come in and was able to do what he was asked to do, run the offense, and get him into field goal position to get that field goal at the end of the first half, the first points for Notre Dame of the game against Penn State. So we've seen Angeli be able to come in, and that obviously is a direct result both of the work that Angeli has put in, but also the development that you talked about that Gino Guidugli has done with these guys who we don't see every Saturday out there, which kind of makes this spring even more exciting, depending on, how much we exactly get to see out there. All right, last offensive assistant coach is the offensive line coach, Joe Rudolph.
So, first word that comes to mind when I think of Joe Rudolph is adaptable or adaptability. And the reason I say that is because Joe Rudolph, I feel like in his is this now his third season, or is this going to be his fourth season at Notre Dame?
Third season.
Third season. This
going into his third season. He's had two seasons going into his third. Yeah.
So, the first year compared to the second year, I think was a just completely different deck of cards, right? Like your first year, you have you have Joe Alt, you've got Blake Fisher, you got a lot of kind of veteran proven experience amongst the offensive line. And then year two is this kind of mixed hand of cards that's got, some veteran guys on there, but not as much talent. And then also a lot of young, bucks basically ready to go, who might not have a little bit more of that experience, but are off the charts when it comes to, just overall kind of athleticism and just being more talented, essentially a higher ceiling than some of these guys that are already here. And so, he took a lot of risks in terms of who he put out there in the Texas A&M lineup. And then as the season went on, the consistent injuries that they had, the shuffling amongst the offensive line. And so, you take year one, what he had, you take year two with a lot of the inexperience and then the injuries that came and having to shuffle around. I think a good word for Joe Rudolph is his adaptability to put together a really good offensive line, reliable offensive line, no matter the circumstance.
Yeah, I think Joe Rudolph is good with the ability to show that he is a great offensive line coach. I think that there is a lot riding on this season for Joe Rudolph because of what Mike is talking about. There are a lot of people who don't think that Joe Rudolph is playing the best five guys, during the season. Now, he had his hand tied behind his back at times this season because of the hand that he was dealt with injuries. When you're coming out of training camp and you have a guy like Jagasaw who gets hurt in the first week of camp, and you basically have, you only have, I don't want to say bad options, but you have less than perfect options to fill that position over there. And they still made it work. Was it perfect? No, but you had a true freshman starting out there at left tackle. And every position on the offensive line, with the exception of Emil Wagner at right tackle, you had at least two guys play over the course of the season. And it wasn't because they were just shuttling guys in and out trying to make things happen. It was because of the injuries and that, and the hand that they were dealt. And the fact that you're able to plug in Charles Jagasaw at the end of the season, in the biggest game of the season, and even in the semifinal as well, and start him in two different positions and, have him, play the way that he did. There's definitely something there, but I think that because of, again, going back to what Mike is talking about, to start Sam Pendleton was egregious. Well, I wouldn't say it was egregious. It worked out okay, but that's sort of the impression that people have of him. And again, with as important as those decisions are, I don't think that that Joe Rudolph rather was making all those decisions completely independently. I'm sure that there was input from other other coaches above him on the food chain, on the coaching
Well,
staff.
you
Don't
know,
you?
I just this is and I'm not trying to be mean to Mike, and I appreciate the feedback and that sort of stuff, but this is one of my things that's like a pet peeve of mine, and I think you know where this is ultimately going to go. Coaches are at practice and watching way more film than we are of said practices on a consistent basis. And there are kind of, checks and balances along the way, right? Like you're not just going to put egregiously the wrong starting five out there and it's going to get past the head coach. And so
Mm-hmm.
I just think it no matter the position, it's always exaggerated at quarterback of, this is the guy. I can't believe he's not starting. But I mean, I just think it goes down the chain of it's a combination of things. And we don't see all of those things on a day-to-day basis like these coaches do. And so I do believe, again, his adaptability to consistently find the group of five who was going to win the said game on hand. That's tough stuff to do. I think they got to get better at pass pro. And I think Riley Leonard's ability to escape the pocket and avoid sacks also
Yes.
masked a couple things this season.
That's going to be the biggest. That's going to be the biggest area that they've got to get better in this year is pass protection, because you're not going to have a Riley Leonard who can bail you out of those situations anymore. Like if it's CJ Carr or Kenny Minchie, obviously both of those have different, differing levels of mobility. Again, Carr's not a pure runner, but he's got great pocket presence, feel for the pocket. His movement is good. He can still, he's got escapability and those kind of things. And Minchie, obviously, not complete Riley Leonard level, but again, he's got the ability to move. So those guys can still help to some extent, but there's a lot more to prove from a pure pass protection standpoint for Rudolph in this offensive line next season.
Agreed, but I think he's got a track record of proving that he's going to figure it out, and I think he's got a lot of talent on his hands as well.
I mean, I still think that Joe Rudolph's biggest issue is his name is not Harry Heastan, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately it's more about that than anything. And, people still think that Harry's going to come out of retirement and come back and lead the offensive line.
You don't have to go too deep on this, but which line coach are you more confident, offense or defensive?
Ooh.
Or is it kind of similar discussions?
It's fairly similar because let's just go ahead and do Al Washington's word association right now, since you let us into that.
Okay.
We can kind of.
Do you want mine then?
So I'll let you go first and then I'll kind of follow it up because, I mean, in terms of scrutiny, I think those two, the two line coaches and Mike Brown, have the most scrutiny of any assistant not named Chris Ash probably coming.
Oh, for sure. And the word I went with for Al Washington, and this is a word kind of thrown around a lot in professional sports, and I think now that NIL is a prominent in college, I think this word fits even more. To me, Al Washington contract year kind of vibes. You know what I mean? So when a player's in a contract year, they know that they got to have a really good, season to kind
it's
of
on. Yeah.
It's on. They
Prove
know
it.
that they got to have a
Prove
good
it.
year. It's a prove it year to make that money that they want. Because the better year they have, the better contract they're going to get, the more years they're going to get on their extension, whatever it might be. I think that's the kind of, again, vibe I feel about Al Washington is he's done a good job. Don't get me wrong, but he also inherited a really good defensive line when he got here. There's been continuous kind of depth. There's still been kind of, the missing on the recruiting end. And now the cupboard is kind of empty in terms of, he lost 2 All-Americans on the inside who are going to get drafted. On the outside, you don't have anyone left between the first couple years that you did. And so now we're seeing kind of a truly developed Al Washington defensive line across the board, essentially. And so for that reason, I think he's got a lot to prove of, can Al Washington put his fingerprint on this defensive line, and can he continue to recruit and get the type of players that they need along the defensive line as well. So that's why I have to go with this is a contract year.
See, I think that last year was kind of his contract year. To me, now I understand what you're saying because you do lose guys like Howard Cross and Riley Mills, two of the anchors of this line. But to me, like, and again, we're doing this word association style. So, like Al Washington, I think he earned his stripes last season because of what, and I agree with Mike completely on this. He did a great job of coaching up the young guys last year.
100%.
Just needs to recruit better. That to me is still it. Now, how much of the recruitment things, is still about NIL and how much money you're going to get from this program versus that program. Like we don't know behind the scenes how much that comes into play, but I can guarantee you it comes into play quite a bit. I mean, and it's across the board, right? Like that's a big factor, like do they need more stars, as in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars on that defensive line? Of course they do. But, like when you look at how Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore were both playing before their injury, Bryce Young had a nice season for a true freshman. Well, KVA is not a defensive lineman, though. He's a linebacker. So,
Whoa.
What do you mean? Whoa, he's a linebacker.
he was. Now he's like that in that the Viper role. He's like the.
That's a linebacker though.
Yeah, he's like a. I could maybe make the exception. He plays like Michael
Al Washington is not coaching KVA. Okay, Max Bola is coaching KVA. Josh Burnham though developed well. Like I think it's when you look at even veterans like Cross and Mills, their best 2 years at Notre Dame were their last 2 years when they were playing for Al Washington. Now he's going into his 4th season here at Notre Dame, but their best 2 seasons, Howard Cross's breakout season came with Al Washington as his position coach. Ditto with Riley Mills. I think that first season there was a lot more unevenness because of maybe some guys that that were inherited, and like things going on, behind the scenes and things like that weren't always the easiest to deal with, those kind of things that that we don't get to see and hear and stuff like that. Like DK says Burnham needs to take the next step. I would agree with that, but he's already taken a nice step to put himself into position, to take the next step. I think that he has developed into a pretty good college defensive end, and he just needs to, as you said, take the next step and continue to get there. But I think that Al Washington has got him. To me, the biggest thing with Washington is just the recruiting part of it. So like you started this by asking the difference between the two. I think that they have both shown that they can develop these guys pretty well. The biggest difference between the two is Joe Rudolph has continued to recruit at a higher level than Al Washington has been able to so far. And that's given Joe Rudolph a little bit different margin of error coming in the door since he's been here.
I would agree with that. I think that you can say, on-field performance is a wash across the board amongst defensive and offensive linemen. And that Joe Rudolph is recruiting at a higher clip. And so, in that regard, I do think that Rudolph is a bit, less under the microscope, and Al Washington has a little bit more of that fire underneath his seat.
DK wants to pretend that you're in a contract year.
Wow. What's that mean?
Coming right at you.
My feelings are hurt now.
Okay, let's go to Max Bola, the linebackers coach.
First word that came to mind was just kind of toughness. But another word that came to mind was versatility. And so I kind of wanted to combine the word into versatile toughness. And so what versatile toughness means to me is his ability to, work across the board with these linebackers. And it's not just, starters 1 and 2. It's 1 through 6 or 1 through 5 almost, in terms of, all these linebackers that need to be game prepared because they're going to have an impact. And so that's what I mean about versatility is, teaching these linebackers to play at multiple positions, to be 1 to 2 deep at every position. And then the toughness. I think that Max Bola overall brings a lot of toughness to the linebacker room. And I think that it has shown, overall in the last couple of seasons, I think we've seen improved physicality, improved tackling, improved, pressuring the quarterback, and, the little things, block destruct, getting off of blocks and making a play. That all comes down to toughness, right? And you teach your players toughness of, absorbing that contact, getting off the first contact, and still being able to make a play. So that's where I think the overall versatile toughness comes from, is these linebackers are all really good, across the board, 1 through 6. They can all play multiple positions, and they're all relentless and tough at the end of the day. So that's where I'll end my Max Bulla rant.
Yeah, I mean, Bulla came into a great situation, and I don't mean that, like is any kind of negative. I mean, when I think of him, I think like passion, energy, the toughness that you talked about, but also the ability to, to put the guys in that room into situations where they can have success. And we saw it with that 5-man linebacker rotation this past season. I mean, it's obvious that the guy, isn't out there just running around like a crazed dog or whatever. Like the guy knows what he's doing, and we saw it. We've been able to see it. Like Drake Bowen is kind of like a little mini avatar of Max Bulla, I think.
Yeah.
Like sideline to the field. Like that's kind of the way that Drake Bowen plays, and some of these other guys as well, but especially Bowen, and what we saw from him at the end of the season. Like you can see Max Bulla sort of bleeding through him, and I just that was to me one of the bigger questions that the defense had, and really on the whole team had last year, was what that linebacker unit was going to look like, because of the fact that you lost so much experience from it, and you had a great blend of experience with Kaiser, obviously, along with the talented youth. And like you can definitely see the recruiting efforts that Marcus Freeman and that staff, and Al Golden being part of it as well, that they've put in. It shows loud and clear with that linebacker room, and Max Bulla is a big part of that now as well. Mike Mickens.
I think Mike Mickens was, to be honest with you, the easiest one. The word I'm going to go with is prodigy. And I think prodigy makes the most sense because, when you talk about who's been one of the hottest, most talented, best developer of, his players ever since Marcus Freeman got here, it's Mickens. And everyone knows that Mike Mickens wants to be a head coach. He wants to grow into that role of being a full-time defensive coordinator. And so he's honestly Marcus Freeman's prodigy, at the end of the day. And so I think the number one thing that sticks out is, the elevated play of the entire secondary, specifically the corners under Mike Mickens. There's guys getting drafted every year now. There's guys who are not only being drafted, but are going to be, not going to be their All-Americans. There's first, second round guys going off the board. You couldn't say that 10 years ago when you were talking about Notre Dame, cornerbacks and secondary, and, kind of the latter years of, Brian Kelly's time here. So combine all those things, I think it's a very easy, he's on that prodigy track.
Yeah, Mike Mickens is the standard setter, especially now that Al Golden is gone. Mickens is the standard setter on the defensive side of the ball, and really, throughout the whole staff right now, is because you lost Dylan McCullough, but all those things that you talk, the reason you can compete for national championships, a big part of it is what he has been able to do, both from identifying the talent and getting them to come here on the roster. Like a guy like Leonard Moore flies under the radar a little bit in the recruiting process. Some people thought that he wasn't fast enough. He sure looked he sure looked fast enough to me when he was out there matched up against some of the elite receivers in college football. And the reason you're able to win in 3 different rounds of the playoffs, a big part of that is because of what you have in the secondary, and specifically, what you've got both in recruiting and the development aspect for Mike Mickens of the secondary. So standard setter right there. And then we've got Marty Biagi, who coaches both special teams and safeties for the Irish.
Yeah, for Marty Biagi, the word that I guess first came to mind was creativity. And the reason I say creativity is every week on special teams, and I know that this is still, kind of Marcus Freeman driven to a degree, but he's constantly finding ways to bring some creative juices to the special teams. That that the special teams is going to have an impact on the game in some way on a week-to-week basis because of something creative that they're doing, something that they haven't shown on tape, something that they've seen on tape to take advantage of a number situation that they like. And that's not only on punt block or, fake field goal, but it's, we've seen it some on kick return. So yeah, I think that creativity is definitely the first word that comes to mind. And also, I've said this before, I love the way that Notre Dame uses their first and second string guys on special teams as well. And I know that doesn't really go into the word creative, but it's still, that's at the request of Marty Biagi. He's basically, getting the okay from coach to say, hey, in order for this thing to be fully effective and for these, kind of schemes to work and the creativity to work, I need a certain type of player. And so it's not a time just to take a break. And so special teams are going to have an impact. You need guys who are going to be able to make an impact, not just get by, essentially.
My word association for Marty Biagi is mad scientist. And Mike definitely is not as impressed with Marty Biagi. He said, meh. Then he said, Marty's good. We got spoiled with Mason, though. I mean, if you go and look at the special teams rankings and the special teams data, Notre Dame was elite in terms of special teams this season. I don't know if they ended up number one, but they were, they're top five. So I think, maybe you got introduced to the world of special teams expectations with Brian Mason, and Biagi didn't necessarily, I think it was tough because he was following Mason last year. This year, he really got to kind of show his worth to me, because when again, like across the board with things like, average starting field position, kick returns, kick coverage, punt coverage, all these different things. Notre Dame was up there in the top of the nation in all these different things. And then obviously the fakes are what stands out, and they still were up there at the top in terms of block kicks as well, So in no world is Marty Biagi a step down from Brian Mason. You had one elite special teams coordinator, and you took a handoff. Marty Biagi is another elite special teams coordinator. I think he needs to be recognized for that. But again, I love the mad scientist aspect of him, just kind of sitting back there, brewing up, dialing up all these different things, whether it's the fakes or the blocks or whatever else. He's been great in the job that he did, especially this year. But I agree with what you're saying as well. When the head coach puts a priority on it, that allows the special teams coordinator to just take the ball and run, and that's what Biagi has done with it. So I didn't do the two new coaches since we haven't, got to see them coach yet, J1 Sider and Chris Ash. Is there anything at all that you want to say about them?
Yeah, for Sider, I think I just want to see, just overall philosophy.
You might want to save that because we're going to start rapid fire, specifically with him. So.
Oh, that's right.
Are you ready for rapid fire?
I think I'm pretty clearly ready for rapid fire now.
Let's do it then. So we are going to be able to talk with new Notre Dame running backs coach J1 Sider for the first time tomorrow. He's going to have a press conference. Is there something you're most anxious or curious to find out about his philosophy / approach?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would be most anxious or curious to find out would be just his his overall kind of snap breakdown for the running backs again. Is it going to be kind of that same, 1A, 1B breakdown, and having, a third down back? They're going to get healthier in the running back room this year with Payne coming back. And so, what effect does that have on either Love or Jadarian? And then, some of those, again, Aeneas Williams, some of these other young backs that are going to be in there. So, there's a potential that you could have 5 working running backs in that room. And so what does that look like? How are you getting those guys on the field? How are you prioritizing, Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price still? Because I think they're going to still be your best running backs in the room. And, I think that him and his experience at Penn State is something that's going to be beneficial at the end of the day. So yeah, I think that's, and then maybe, if someone sneaks in the question of, hey, do you believe in a 2-back philosophy by any chance? Like, could we alleviate that with seeing maybe some more 2-backs on the field?
You're talking about like 21 personnel.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that's going to be him and how much is going to be Mike Denbrock, though. That's a good
Or
question.
if he has influence, if maybe something that he sees could be beneficial to this team type situation. And then the last part of it would be, Dylan, before he left, did a really good job of setting the standard about what it means to be a Notre Dame running back. And so does he share those kind of similar ideas, that checklist of what you have to do and meeting that standard? I don't want the criteria to lessen. I want these running backs to be continuously held to a high standard because it's shown to be impactful on the field. And so I think those are the 2 things that I would be most curious to kind of listen into.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just kind of what you started with in terms of Dylan McCullough from the time he came in the door at Notre Dame when he was hired and we got to talk to him for the first time. It was very obvious, one, that he was very confident, like in himself, both in his, ability to coach and communicate and, to recruit as well. But 2, he talked right away about the list of the 8 jobs, for the running backs. And like, that's how you keep all these guys involved. One thing we know from, in terms of Sider is you look at what Penn State did this past season with Allen and Singleton. They both ran for over 1,000 yards. So you know that he's got a willingness, to use 2 different guys situationally. So I think that, at least in terms of the top 2 guys, Love and Price, I wouldn't expect that there are going to be a lot of differences. But, how do the roles, what are his priorities, in terms of using guys in other roles, that kind of thing. So Tommy's asking me to make sure to ask for name pronunciation guidance so we all know. I don't know if that means that someone on another show has been saying his name differently, but according to the pronunciation guides that I have seen, including one that was sent out by Notre Dame, Jaywan Sider is how it's said. He'll be introduced tomorrow, so you'll actually hear someone, besides us say his name. I'm fairly confident in the pronunciation guides that I have seen. I've said before, if you're going to go by Brian's pronunciations, good luck. I have no problem saying that because you can name a couple common names that I know for sure that the big guy is saying wrong. So that's all I'll say with that. Manti Te'o and former USC and NFL quarterback Cody Kessler are hosting Good Morning Football together this week. They've each gave their favorite players growing up from the other team. It's interesting that Manti, who of course played at Notre Dame, was a USC fan growing up, and Kessler, who played for USC, was a Notre Dame fan growing up. Manti's favorite USC players were Junior Seau, Reggie Bush, and Troy Polamalu. Kessler's favorite Notre Dame players were Tom Zbikowski, Brady Quinn, and Jimmy Clausen. So, Jesse, do you have a USC player who you liked growing up?
Yeah, my favorite USC player growing up couldn't be anyone of like the likes of Matt Leinart or Reggie Bush or any of that crew because they broke the heart too many times when Notre Dame was, actually good at football. So a guy that I enjoyed kind of watching and ended up having a really good NFL career would be Troy Polamalu. I think he was like, he sometimes doesn't get lost, but just a really good quality NFL player. I love the way he always came downhill and was, take the big hits that he would put on running backs and wide receivers and stuff like that. So I would have to go with Troy Polamalu because, again, it's easier to do it for a defensive player because they're not the guy throwing for 400 yards or rushing for, all these touchdowns and yards and stuff and having an impact on the game in terms of scoring. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at, Troy Polamalu.
I wondered if maybe that's who yours would be, Troy Polamalu. I didn't know like if Reggie Bush might slide in there for you. I didn't think so. Bush push and all. Mine, obviously goes back a little bit farther because we're talking, DK. No.
Let me guess yours. No. I think it would be Marcus Allen.
You nailed it. Took the words right out of my mouth.
So I know Marcus Allen was a great Chiefs running back, so I think that made it a little bit easier for you. Someone I considered, but I always like to do these for players I actually grew up and watched or kind of was at least around and experienced, right? So it's like you can't really go with OJ Simpson or Marcus Allen or those types of players.
And that was kind of the spirit of the question, was guys that you actually grew up watching. And obviously even before Marcus Allen got to Kansas City, he was with the Raiders and obviously USC before that. But like, even like I would throw Charles White, like White and Allen were back to back there at the end of the 70s. Like Marcus Allen was just so smooth and could, just glide it, and he never seemed to take the big hits, and just always had the good personality, I think, to go along with it. And you actually, do you remember when you got to meet him at the College Football Hall of Fame, or are you too young to remember that?
No, I remember meeting him. I couldn't remember the exact moment, but I do know I met him and I got to meet Emmitt Smith at one point. So yeah, I met some pretty good running backs in my day.
There were a lot back in those days. Yeah. So Marcus Allen was mine. What about an easier one? Who's your least favorite / most despised USC player?
So I think, a lot of people, the easy answers would be like, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush. Who was the other? There was another quarterback that was right after Leinart. It wasn't as, Mark Sanchez. You could put any of those
names. Carson Palmer came before him. I think Sanchez came right after him.
Was Barkley another one? I want to say Barkley was a quarterback for USC.
Yeah.
I know that's not right. But anyways, long story short, I got to go with Keyshawn Johnson because he's a guy who continuously runs his mouth
I like it.
about Notre Dame. And before that 2023 game called Notre Dame a dump, just for a guy that I think he only played Notre Dame twice because he was a 2-year guy. One of the years they beat him. Another year they actually tied, coincidentally enough, when Keyshawn, I think in '94 when they played. So, it's just a guy. It's not like he really dominated Notre Dame or had all this great success against Notre Dame. And since the 2000s, or recent, Notre Dame's been dominating the series and kind of winning the important games. And so I just didn't like Keyshawn Johnson. Just seems to run his mouth a little bit for someone that's not like in the depths of the trenches of the rivalry.
Yeah. Well, I know. He's always like in terms of the Notre Dame USC rivalry, Keyshawn Johnson has definitely been the most outspoken, like anti-Notre Dame USC guy, I think.
The dump comment was just so unwarranted.
Yeah. I mean, because
like the Coliseum is so much better than
his palace. Like, come on, man. Like, he's obviously been there quite a bit. And while they're both old stadiums, I would definitely, and I think most fans would, especially inside out and the general odor of Notre Dame Stadium compared to the Coliseum, I would definitely take that.
I did have it right. It was Matt Barkley. That's the name I was thinking of.
That was it.
Mine is Ronnie Lott. Guy.
My most despised is Ronnie Lott. Now, granted, a good deal of it has to do with the fact that he played for those great 49ers teams of the 1980s.
That's like a double whammy for you.
But, it goes back to USC And the guy was just, trucking people left and right. And like, he was a great player, and I can definitely appreciate him as a player a lot more now. But back in his playing days, Ronnie Lott was at the top of the list. Okay, even easier one. Who is your most favorite Notre Dame player from your
So this isn't easy because it's hard to narrow the list down to one person. I'll do my good old favorite for you. I'll give you one offense and one defense. Defense, I'll go Manti Te'o.
Okay.
Offense, it's tough, but I have to go with Jeff Samardzija because of the way he dominated in baseball as well.
Is Golden Tate your number 2?
Or Brady Quinn. It's
Brady
really
Quinn?
close.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was Samardzija and
if
Tate.
you force me to pick one overall, it would be Manti Te'o, but I just think it's always fun to put an offensive person in there as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, like, growing up, like, you got to be there for, that, like, I kind of call that like the rock star heyday. Brady Quinn, Jeff Samardzija, Tom Zibikowski, that whole group, it was like a rock band, like
there was star power.
Yeah. You had the long-haired Samardzija and Zibikowski, with his buzzed hair and, the boxing and the whole thing. And then, Brady Quinn with his chiseled jaw, lead singer, good looks and all that kind of stuff. You could easily see Zibikowski banging back there on the drums and Samardzija just rocking out on the guitar and the whole thing. So, yep. And I agree with Anthony. For mine was Rocket. Now, granted, he was a little bit, like more toward my teenage years than young, but like from, it's been long enough. We're going on almost 40 years at this point. So Rocket is number 1, just the explosive, like nobody before him, nobody since has who's put on a Notre Dame uniform has had that kind of explosiveness and just sheer game-changing ability anytime he touched the football. And there've been, a lot of greats, but for me, it was Rocket for sure. Okay, so we're going to get into the Notre Dame women's basketball. And by the way, thank you, Anthony, for the super chat that you sent in there. We always appreciate it when you do that. Speaking of people who hate Notre Dame, Diana Taurasi apparently is retiring. I've never heard Diana Taurasi have one good thing to say about Notre Dame either. So good luck, good riddance, whatever. Diana Taurasi was a freshman in the 2000-2001 season. That was my first season calling Notre Dame women's basketball games when they won the national championship that year. And of course, she went on to win championships, plural, with UConn. But Notre Dame and UConn played 3 times that season. And I know in the 2 losses that UConn had to Notre Dame, she had 2 of her worst games of the season. Did not shoot well at all. Again, went on, did great things. It's amazing to me, like when you think that she was a freshman that year, Neil Ivey was a 5th-year senior that year, and Diana Taurasi is just now retiring 24 years later. It's kind of amazing. She's obviously had a great and illustrious career, but it doesn't mean we have to like her.
That's pretty funny, actually.
So she did actually show more respect for Hannah Hidalgo last year out there when Notre Dame beat UConn than Stewart did. So for whatever that's worth. Okay, so Notre Dame women's basketball saw its 19-game winning streak end with Sunday's double overtime loss at NC State. Do you buy or sell the loss could be good for the Irish?
So I don't. This is a tough question. I think it's up to the team and ultimately how it's supposed to go. They just got the number 1 ranking. They had a tough matchup with Duke earlier in the week. They go down to Miami and handle business, but then don't get the opportunity to kind of come back home and reset. It was kind of that atypical or prolonged road trip. And so bouncing around. And I know when they were in Miami, they got a lot of, feedback or visits from a lot of ex-players, a lot of people of influence within the women's basketball industry. I know they went to one of those like professional basketball games as well, I think in one of the off days. And so I just think that it all kind of caught up to him at the end of the day. You know, the number 1 seed, the long road trip, kind of people starting to talk to them about expectations and how to handle, you know, greatness and being one of the top teams in the country and what it takes to accomplish that ultimate goal. And then you throw in NC State, 19-game home winning streak, a number 12 team in the country, a really good team, only 2 losses in the ACC so far. So, you know, this is on the players to determine. I personally think it will be a good thing because I think it's humbling. You can't win every single game unless you're like UConn or South Carolina, where like that barely happens. But, you know, to me, this was like a solid, almost Elite Eight type matchup for Notre Dame, kind of, you know, on the latter half of the season here. And it went to double overtime on a true road environment. And so I don't know, Notre Dame didn't play its best game, and we'll kind of maybe talk about that here in a little bit, but
we will.
It's essentially a tie game on the road on a noon game in a sellout arena in North Carolina. They're not going to play many more games like that aren't.
They will play zero. They will play 0 games in that kind of environment, you know, unless, you know, with the exception of, you know, what the home crowd looks like these next couple of games in the NCAA tournament. They will not have to play in a hostile environment like that again. I will say, you know, and like, I know you were watching it on TV, and I think you and Vince were both kind of texting me, you know, from time to time. I mean, I know you both were, but like the environment that was like, other than UConn and maybe even on par with UConn, that was one of the better road environments that I've seen Notre Dame played in for a women's basketball game. It was nuts in there. Students just packed, you know, to the top of the rafters and, you know, into the game the whole time. You know, obviously the home crowd was going crazy, you know, so like, you know, just from that aspect, one, you know, give them credit for that. But like you said, double overtime on the road in a noon game against a really good team. It's not like this was a fluke, you know, like this is still the second best team in the ACC. And, you know, now they're going to battle down these last couple of games to the end of the regular season for who's going to win the ACC. But like, this is a really good team that went to the Final Four last year and returned, I think, like 75%, you know, of
that's
their
the other part of
from
it.
That team.
Sanaya Rivers and Isaiah James are first-round draft picks in themselves. They're going to be top 15 players in the WNBA draft. And so you combine that with Olivia Miles, Sonia Citron, and Maddie Westbelt, you got 5 first-round draft picks all on the floor, 3 Notre Dame, 2 North Carolina State, you know, playing at the end of the day. And so, like you said, I just think that it caught up to them a little bit, because I don't think that Hannah had especially her best performance. And really, you know, this isn't a one-off situation. The women's team has now lost to North Carolina State in the regular season 3 straight matchups. They got them last year in the ACC tournament, but regular season matchups, North Carolina State has now won 3 of these in a row. And I'll tell you what, they're never blowouts. And when they played the ACC tournament, Notre Dame won by 4 points and had to come back late and finish that game.
Right.
So, you know, these games with North Carolina State are very close. It's just one of those opponents where North Carolina State is always really good. Notre Dame is always really good, and they match up well. And it was on the road, and it went to double overtime. That's basically a tie game. You know, like if you're really thinking about it, it's a tie game, but you had to find a winner at some point, and that was North Carolina State. Because that was the frustrating part about this game when watching it, is Notre Dame would keep it within 2 to 4, and every time they'd get a basket, North Carolina State would race down and get a basket.
Yeah, they just couldn't come up with the stops.
They couldn't get the stop after getting a basket of their own, right? Like, Notre Dame would miss a basket, North Carolina State would miss a basket. The only time North Carolina State would make a basket was when Notre Dame made a basket. At least was what it felt like, right? Like Notre Dame could never just pull, you know, all the way ahead. And again, I'm not making excuses, because I think Notre Dame is the better team and they should have won that game ultimately. But I thought defensively there was, you know, signs of fatigue, lack of effort. I thought Hannah Hidalgo, and I know her thing is to bounce around, a lot, but I felt like she was trailing a lot after not really staying with her man at certain times. And I thought in transition, Hannah kind of forced some passes here and there. I don't think she played her A game. And I think that was kind of, in my opinion, the difference maker in the game.
Well, I mean, somebody brought up they were 40 of 97, so they still shot better. They still shot 41%, but they missed 57 shots in the game. They only turned the ball over 12 times, so it's not like they were completely reckless with the ball. To me, it's like NC State was able to get them out of their game a little bit because Notre Dame did a really good job of scoring transition points in the first half. NC State, I mean, I specifically remember you texted me like they were starting to run out of gas. So what did Westmore do? They reeled it in. They dialed it down. They slowed the pace. And that's where Notre Dame was affected. Before I get to more of that, though, I'll just say, yes, I do think that like you never hope for a loss. You never want a loss. But I do think that this can very similarly to they go to the Cayman Islands and they lose those 2 games right after beating number 3 USC on the road. I think that those 2 games really helped refocus this team and galvanize them. And then what they do, they went out and beat Texas and UConn right afterwards. So like, I do think that some of the things that happened in this game can really be used as a good talking point and some teaching points for Niall Ivey and her staff, because a big thing that also happened in this game, it's not just missing the shots. They only had 13 assists on 40 made field goals in the game. Notre Dame did. So that's about a 32% rate. For the season, they're 54% in terms of assists to made field goals. When they are at their best, they're doing a couple of different things. One, they're getting stops at the defensive end. 2, they turn that into transition points. But also, when they're in the half court, they're sharing the basketball, and they just didn't do enough of that on Saturday. They didn't make NC State have to work for it enough at the defensive end and break them down. And again, 30 assists on 40 made field goals. But, again, like you go back, 21 ties, 21 lead changes. I've never called a game like that, Jesse. I've never called a game with 21 ties and 21 lead changes. Usually, like if it's around 10 and 10 ties, 10 lead changes, like that's a pretty competitive game. There were 21 in a double overtime game. And, again, at the end of the day, with all that they faced, the fact that it went to double overtime and it was so back and forth throughout the day against another really good team, it's like sometimes it's just not your day. But I think it's definitely something that they can regroup and learn from going forward, especially when you're this close to the tournament. Like in terms of the timing, I think that you can definitely, that the coaching staff can definitely use this with some, good talking points going forward. Because look, you're going to get into the tournament, 2 different things. One, you're not going to face a team of NC State's caliber until basically around the Elite 8. Like that's NC State's an Elite 8 Final Four type opponent. So you're not going to face that until you get there. You're not going to face that kind of environment until you get there. But what teams are likely going to want to do is slow the pace as much as possible to try to keep Notre Dame in half-court sets as much as possible.
For sure. And I think that this loss is a good kind of recalibration for Notre Dame, things to kind of work on for, if this type of game style presents itself, ACC tournament, NCAA tournament. But ultimately, you just won't see a combination of this again. Notre Dame missing the amount of shots, and a team that shot as well as efficient as NC State did. They shot like almost 45% from the field and from 3 at the end of the day. I know both those numbers were over 40% for sure. Anything over 30% is a really good clip from 3 to be over 40%. I mean, that was the ultimate difference maker in the game. And then, like you said, too, I felt like Notre Dame kind of rushed their sets a little bit, and we're not taking or making the extra passes that we're used to seeing on offense. And I think that's really what hurt them, down the stretch, too. So, again, you're just not going to see a combination of that many missed shots and a team shoot kind of close to 45% from the field all around.
Well, and the other thing is, I know, like from a defensive perspective, because of how athletic that NC State is. I know Notre Dame wanted to be able to, and they played some zone here and there. They played more late, I think, than they did early. They wanted to do it, to be able to mix some in early, but NC State was hitting the threes early on. They didn't end up with a great 3-point percentage. NC State didn't, but in the first half they were 6 of 12. So it's like you're not going to be able to get into too many zone looks when the other team is hitting those kind of threes. But the other aspect of this, and look, you haven't heard me whine and moan and stuff about officiating and stuff like that. Notre Dame was whistled for 21 fouls. NC State 9, and NC State
got very ticky-tacky at the end.
They hit their first 20 free throws. Notre Dame didn't even shoot 20 free throws in the game. Notre Dame was 8 for 10. NC State ended up 24 of 26 in a game where both teams that's as intense as it is, and both teams are playing man-to-man throughout. You can't tell me that the fouls should be more than 2-1 in one team's favor. That's just way too far out of whack. And I look at, Tilda Trieger, their NC State's post player. She's a true freshman. She played 43 minutes in that game. No fouls. I'm sorry. I don't buy that. I saw too much contact in the paint to buy that. And again, it's not all about that, but that's just too big a disparity for me.
The ones that, and again, not to get too deep out into this rabbit hole, I think one of the things that really irked me was second overtime. NC State gets a bucket or two to start, and then Sony's called for that horrible offensive foul, and
right.
then NC State just goes on a crazy run. And again, I thought it was largely propelled by getting a basket, getting the ball back, and then getting another basket off of just that. It should even extend the arm, and the defensive player was nowhere close to be set. And it's like, you haven't called that kind of touchy stuff all game, but now you're calling it in double overtime, and this team subsequently goes on a run a bit basically because of it and runs away with the game. I just felt like that was a big momentum turner in that second overtime of taking a possession away from Notre Dame.
Right. And obviously, late in the game, in the fourth quarter and in overtime, Hidalgo and Miles both had 4 fouls. So like people talking about their defense, there's only so much you can do at that point when you're playing with 4 fouls and you're trying to stay in till the end. Like you might remember, Niele Ivey was subbing Kassan Prosper.
Yeah, defense for
offense defense with Olivia Miles to try to protect Olivia and to have a little bit of an upgrade at the defensive end of the floor as well. Notre Dame took almost 20 more shots though than NC State, but got called for 12 more fouls than NC State. The math just doesn't add up. I'm sorry. Because again, like before that, their fouls, in terms of, fouls for the season, they're about 50-50. It's never been that lopsided. Like both Texas and UConn games, again, like when you look at the caliber of what they were playing, very similar. I do find it interesting that Billy Smith, the male official in the game, has officiated 2 of Notre Dame's 3 losses this season. He was down there in the Cayman Islands for the TCU loss.
Uh-oh.
He's the one, though, who blew the foul. He made the call when Maddie Westfeld was shooting. He's the one who called. I couldn't believe that, the first thing I did was look at the clock. He called that foul, but then they went to the replay monitor and said no foul.
Oh, yeah, they took the foul off, yeah.
I still think, they played it. I didn't get to see it on a TV screen.
I don't know how the call in the court didn't stand.
It looked to me like there was at least a 1/10 of a second left because they were showing it on the, like the Jumbotron monitor in the arena. It looked like there was just a fraction of time left, but they waved it off. And if they don't do that, she's going to hit one of the 2 free throws and they win.
Did you ever hear what the medical emergency was?
So what I was told is, and for those watching, or for those who weren't watching, either way, so there was a long delay after Citron hits the shot, at the end of regulation. And I had no idea, there was like an official from, out talking. Turned out apparently someone in the stands had a heart attack, is what I was told.
Wow.
And
so much excitement, I guess.
Yeah, so the EMTs had to come, and there was a huge group of EMTs, and they took him out on a stretcher and out of the arena. Yeah, it was like right after Citron hit the shot. So, and I never, heard anything afterwards. Obviously, hopefully he's okay and everything. But I don't, again, like to me, an Elite Eight type matchup, a great matchup, great environment, the whole thing. I think that there's a lot that I think Notre Dame can really kind of refocus on this going into the postseason and not have to worry about the winning streak and all those different kind of things. They've got a lot to play for to kind of keep them, motivated, and there's still going to be a target on their back because they're Notre Dame, but I think it shifts the target a little bit. Andy Saylor wants to know, will they still get a number 1 seed in the big tournament? Well, I mean, obviously it depends on how they finish out. The NCAA is going to put out the final pre-selection show seeding, the 1 through 16, Thursday night. Interestingly enough, I'll be over at Purcell Pavilion probably about the time this comes out, but they'll put out the 1 through 16 again. So we'll see what the committee thinks of Notre Dame, because there's been a lot of movement. South Carolina has lost, Notre Dame has lost, UCLA has, so there's been a lot that's happened since they put out the first seedings about a week and a half or so ago. But yeah, so we'll find. Long story short, I think yes, they have a really good chance of still getting a number 1 seed. Will they get the number 1 overall seed? I would say that odds are probably against that now, but they can still get one of the number 1 seeds, I think. Fill in the blank, Jess. Sonia Citron's buzzer-beating 3 to send the game to overtime was blank.
Was shocking, was electric, was out of nowhere. I don't know, like all of the above. Like it felt like they had a chance. I didn't think Sony was going to be the shooter of the ball, and I don't think she did either. I think the play kind of fell apart to a degree. I thought Olivia Miles was going to have something drawn up for her, and she was going to be the person shooting the ball. So it was an unexpected thriller, to be honest with you, because, Sony made the best of a situation, and she chucked that thing up and I think shocked everyone and definitely took all the air out of the stadium and sent that thing, right into overtime, and just kind of continued this just kind of heavyweight fight that was going on because of what you were saying, all the ties and lead changes. And it's like, of course, it's fitting that this thing isn't going to end in regulation, and we hit a deep 3 to tie it up at the buzzer to play more basketball.
I mean, I think you're right about making the best of the situation, because there's really, because the pass, remember, it almost got away from her. She kind of had to reach, and so that lost about a second worth of time. They inbounded with 4.5, so she had to make a decision pretty quick. And she got close. She had 2 hands in her face, and she still makes it over. I mean, it freaking swished, and it's like I've loved going back and watching the replays of it, because one right behind the bench, her close personal friend Maris Leofau just does the double, this, holding his arms up in the air, and I think he kind of like thumped his chest a little bit. That was cool. But then watching the players as well, Leah Tu King starts screaming, and Olivia Miles starts screaming. Hannah Hidalgo's like jumping in the air, and King and Miles just kind of come together, and they do this sandwich, where they sandwich Sonia Citron after she made it. Probably the biggest single shot since Olivia Miles beat Louisville in overtime a couple of years ago. I don't know if you remember that when they beat Louisville in overtime at home, when Olivia Miles hit that shot at the end of the game. I think that's probably, the biggest shot since then. It was pretty awesome. Yeah. Indy Saylor, Enrique 2.0. And the degree of difficulty might have even been bigger because of the hand that she had in her face on the shot. So pretty cool. So the New York Yankees have made a couple announcements in the last week. They've changed their facial hair policy to allow players to have well-groomed beards. And they're also going to stop playing Frank Sinatra's New York, New York in the stadium after losses. Which of these is more significant, Jesse?
To me, the facial hair policy is more significant. I could care less about what song they're playing when they lose, because they lose, and everyone loves when the Yankees lose at the end of the day. So I've always thought the facial hair thing was childish. These are grown adults making grown man money. I don't think you need to regulate what kind of facial hair that they have at the end of the day. And I think it's, often childish, because you see some of these guys traded to the Yankees and they look like a completely different, younger version of themselves, essentially, at the end of the day. So it just felt like something that was unnecessary, and again, kind of extended that amount of control that they had for no, real reason.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's the facial hair policy, because I always just thought it was so stupid when you're considering grown men at the end of the day.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's amazing to me when you think about the fact that it took the Yankees longer than the military to change their facial hair policy, to ease up on the facial hair. Like I've looked back at some of the photos I have, from my time in the Army, and like back in those days, like the mustache couldn't go past like the crook of your mouth, like the corners of your mouth right here. So like if you did this, like you had to have it, and so guys would have these ridiculous looking, like mustaches, just up here on top of the mouth. But obviously, like when, things happened, in Iraq and Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff, they let them change it up a little bit, but the New York Yankees just stuck with it. And yeah, welcome to 2025. It's insane that it's taken this long. I guess people were complaining about the New York after they lost the World Series and they were playing it last year, like they were celebrating or something. It's like, who cares? It's a song. But you're absolutely right. Like the thing with the facial hair, these are grown men. They should be able to do what they want. They shouldn't have to adhere to that. So Peyton and Eli Manning are 3 seasons into their Manning cast now, going into year 4. Would you rather see them continue to do the alternate Monday Night Football broadcast, or have their current format be a main broadcast and say the number 2 or number 3 game for one of the networks on a Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, I like the current situation. I think you keep them in Monday night. Moving them to Sunday is a little bit too regimented, and like, I like the fun and playfulness of their cast, and I don't think that it translates over to a main broadcast. I think it functions better as knowing it's the alternate, kind of maybe more fun, broadcast comparatively. And so I like keeping it where it's at. And then also, on Sundays, I'm pretty locked in regardless of who's playing. But Monday nights, I feel like sometimes I'm more hit and miss. And so having the Manning cast as the alternate kind of still lures me in to maybe some of those more uninterested, Monday night games, essentially. I think the better question would be, could they alternate between Thursdays and Mondays to relieve, how bad that Al Michaels and Kirk Herbstreit booth can be in bad games? That's the thing, is it's only in the bad games, because they both just drown in that misery or sorrow of how bad the game is. And that's the opposite. Like the Manning cast is always bringing optimism, and like, a team could be down like 21 and Peyton's up there, talking about how can we get the ball down the field? How can we score a touchdown here? Like those sort of situations. And so I like those on the non-traditional Sunday games, because again, they find ways to bring, some spice to the only game on that day. On Sunday, I got other games I can watch. On those days, it's that game no matter what. And so having that alternate really helps me out.
That's a good point. I wouldn't want it as a standalone broadcast, because typically if I'm watching, those games, like if it's a Saturday game, it's because I want to watch the Cowboys, right? And if I want to watch, the Cowboys, or, like insert whatever team, like if I want to watch the game, I want to watch the game. I'm not looking for extra entertainment. I want to be able to focus on the game. And just the way they do it with the Manning cast, like you said, it's a nice alternative, but I wouldn't want it to be the main thing, because they're up there on the screen and the whole thing. I want to see the actual football game, and I want them to be talking play-by-play, just like an announcer does, about what's actually going on and giving me detail on it. I like it as a changeup. I don't like it as a fastball. So I would stick with it where it is. You make a great point about Thursdays though. And like, I feel like Amazon, with all those guys they've got in the pregame, like put Richard Sherman and
all the
Big Wit.
gadgets and stuff that they have too that they can do with like on-screen movements,
Yeah.
like a live kind of whiteboard situation.
Yeah.
Like Amazon's got the technology where you could do, I think, some fun stuff. Like, you know how like I don't know the last time you've watched the NBA on TNT, but you know how like Kenny the Jet will jump into the screen and it looks like he's on the court. Like doing something like that with Richard Sherman demoing, like a coverage scheme, or Ryan Fitzpatrick back there in the eyes of the quarterback and showing you, how the defense is moving and what you need to be like. That would be kind of fun, using technology to see the game through a lens of the player, basically.
I agree. That's a really good idea. And it feels like that, that's an opportunity for these streamers to do something like that. Like if Netflix,
I think it allows you to nerd out,
Yeah.
and allow kind of like the more, non-surface level fan to kind of go deeper into it than that kind of sub layer of knowledge, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and and again, like they've got all those guys there. If they're doing those Thursday games, they've got all those former NFL players there doing their pregame show anyway. And a lot of people really love that Amazon pregame show. I don't watch a ton of it. I don't watch a ton of pregame shows in general, but when I do, like, it's generally pretty entertaining. So why not lean into that a little bit more? What difference does it make if they're watching the mainstream? Just like Monday Night Football, they're willing, to split their audiences up between ESPN and ESPN2, because at the end of the day, there's still eyeballs, regardless of which channel it is. So, whether it's like Amazon with that existing Thursday night package, or if Netflix is going to get more into NFL going forward, do some more of that. Like I'm all about the alternate broadcast. As you know, like I keep saying, like it just feels like there's a golden opportunity for Notre Dame with Peacock, considering Peacock has so many issues with trying to get eyeballs there. It feels like rather than just doing a straight up simulcast of what's already on broadcast TV, it feels like that's an opportunity to do something different, but they've never done anything different with it. Fill in the blank. Stephen Jones of the Cowboys says the team is going to be, quote, selectively aggressive in its approach to free agents this offseason. That means you feel blank, Jesse.
So I don't know why you're wasting my time, the people's time, with this question.
There's a reason this is the last question of the night.
Luckily, you put it at the end, so we don't. This is when everyone just rage quits and clicks off because they know it's coming. DK and his friends start drinking because the hot word is Cowboys. So, I'll believe it when I see it. The way it makes me feel is just meh. I've heard this story before. I've heard that, it's supposed to be better.
Isn't it just another edition of All In, from
That's
last
what I
year?
mean. It's just
like,
it's just, what do they call it? It's just putting makeup on a pig, right?
Yeah,
the pig
perfume on a pig. Yeah.
The pig is still nasty and gross, and that's the organization of the Dallas Cowboys and just how they're run. And then the makeup is, or the perfume is, all these little one-liners they give us in the off season or training camp or mid-season, and then nothing changes. This is the same franchise that traded for Trey Lance and gave up a draft pick, but now they're releasing him, and he did nothing but be your third-string quarterback who you gave no real development time to when Dak Prescott went down. You just went with the good old reliable Cooper Rush, knowing exactly what Cooper Rush is and what he brings to the table.
Yep.
But now you're releasing Trey. So it's just like,
after you gave up a 4th-round pick.
You say all these things, but then you continue to double down on making stupid move after stupid move. And then you come out and you say stuff about the salary cap and you can't work a roster. And it's like, okay, well, the Eagles just won a Super Bowl with, more salary cap constraints. They're just lazy and not creative at the end of the day. And they just want to do things the way that they've been doing it for 30, 40 years and not really have to think outside the box too much. And so until I start seeing some creativity and whatever, then it's just you're stuck in the same old makeup on the pig situation.
No, I mean that's exactly what it is. At the end of the day, like they generally draft pretty well, especially at the top of the draft. They draft well at the top of the draft. Their issue every year is, like they re-sign their big stars, but they don't re-sign, like the mid-level guys, like OC Odigizua. Like he's up for free agency this year. Are they going to re-sign him, or is somebody going to offer him a lot more money to go play someplace else? Like they're not able to retain those guys, and so what happens is the combination of the fact that they are generally not aggressive in free agency. They have to restock everything through the draft every year, and they've got so many immediate pressing needs in the draft they can never address everything, and that's why they're in this constant, cycle, lather, rinse, repeat of just good enough, but not really good enough to compete for championships.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that gets thrown on the shoulders of Dak Prescott. I just saw something the other day where it was just like, everyone was talking about. Basically, it was, Romo and Dak, both really good quarterbacks, edge of great elite quarterbacks, but for some reason they fell in the biggest moments in the playoffs, and it's like, well, maybe the common denominator isn't the quarterback; it's the things around the quarterback and the whole entire organization and team kind of laying an egg in those big situations, and it just gets shouldered to the quarterback, because that's what the NFL is. It's just a league, unfortunately, where wins and losses is all predicated about quarterback, and those losses and wins are given to the quarterback at the end of the day, right? Like that's anytime a team loses, you blame the quarterback. You don't blame the team, you blame the quarterback. But unfortunately, the Cowboys as a team just haven't been an organization, haven't been good for 20 years. And
30.
Some of those players, unfortunately, have to shoulder that blame. So,
all right, we will end it with that. Since I know Tommy loves the fact that we talk about the Dallas Cowboys.
It was like 3 minutes at the very end.
3 minutes after 90 minutes.
I'll give you guys 3 minutes of your day back. I'm sorry.
Right. But pay you for the time. All right. Appreciate you being here tonight. Good show. We will talk to you tomorrow. We've got a little mailbag coming up, so we will talk to you then. Ivy Nation Sports Talk.